In the dense air of late autumn at Fairmont Crest, as the trees before the Dupree estate slowly blazed into crimson, everyone in that gated enclave seemed to carry an ember inside ready to flare at any moment, yet afraid of being seen. Andre, with the calm, polished demeanor that invited trust, was the one who harbored the most secrets. He had once been Danny's pride, the husband he still claimed to love, but behind the gentle smile lay a trail of shadowy arrangements and promises that had saved him from collapse years ago and now returned like a cord tightening around his throat. When Anita and Vernon requested a private meeting, Andre understood that this family talk was nothing so simple as a cordial invitation. In a room lit by a chandelier whose light glinted on cold stone walls, every gaze converged on him. Anita, with the razor poise of a woman who had steered the Dupree family through more than one storm, had no need to say much. Vernon remained silent, but his silence was the strongest weapon of all, heavy with suspicion and calculation. Andre felt himself being tried not by words, but by looks. He wondered whether they already knew, or were merely testing the waters. Had Vernon uncovered some buried part of the past, or had Anita quietly conducted her own inquiry to protect the family's honor before it was too late? Meanwhile, Danny was absorbed in preparations for a lavish Forrester Creations shoot, utterly unaware that the husband she trusted had become the centerpiece of an off-the-record interrogation. For Danny, the flash of lights and the sumptuous images were the only way to prove she was more than Andre's shadow. Yet behind the professional smile stretched a hollow, a place where she felt used but did not dare admit it. For if Forrester and the Dupree conglomerate truly maintained covert commercial agreements, then she was little more than merchandise, displayed as a pristine emblem while dusted within by money and power. Danny did not know she had been placed at the heart of a far larger plan, one in which every line of her face and every public appearance had been calculated to conceal a string of contracts capable of shaking the entire Dupree dynasty. At the same time, on another tier of that upper-crust world, Leslie was playing a different game. Ted, a man who had just lost Nicole's trust, lived in the hush between regret and the hunger to be consoled. With an icy instinct and pragmatic intelligence, Leslie understood that men like Ted needed only a little sympathy to abandon all reason. She appeared at his side and said just enough to make him believe she stood with him, that she understood him better than anyone else. But behind that seemingly benevolent gaze, Leslie was not seeking love, she was seeking control. She had waited for this moment since recognizing Ted as the key to the door leading to the Dupree's wealth and power. She knew about Kat and Eva, about the murky investments Ted strained to hide, and perhaps she was the very one who had quietly poured oil on the flames between the two women, turning chaos into opportunity. While Ted still waited through remorse, Leslie had already drawn up a plan to approach those who held the true information. She did not need to strike openly, it was enough to wait until Ted trusted her completely, and then one deft turn of the board would cost him everything. Shanice was another story, more tragic, more divided. She had once promised herself never to love a man like Derek, a man deeply wounded, wrapped in layers designed to hide his fragility. Yet people are often drawn to the wounds they long to heal. Shanice had gone too far in her help, to the point of making herself emotionally dependent. She stayed with Derek not only out of affection, but because she needed to feel needed. Now, seeing that their closeness only deepened his dead end, fear took root. She feared that if she left, he would collapse; if she stayed, she would disappear into herself. On long nights, with Derek lying motionless and her sitting quietly by the bed, Shanice asked herself whether love could redeem someone steadily losing his humanity, or whether it was merely a pretext to spare herself from facing her own emptiness. There were moments when Derek's eyes on her were no longer warm but cutting, as if he knew she was contemplating escape. His dependency had ceased to be a need to be loved and hardened into a need to possess. While these lives orbited one another with their own designs, Vernon remained the axis of everything. He looked composed, his voice measured, but every word he spoke carried a deeper stratum of meaning. In Vernon's world, family honor was sacred, and to protect it, he was sometimes willing to sacrifice the truest part of himself. Sitting across from Andre, he saw in the younger man a reflection of his own distant self, a man of ambition who had bargained away his principles for position. His anger was not solely for Andre, it was also for his past. If Andre had truly betrayed Danny's trust, Vernon would not hesitate to punish him, for he believed one person's weakness could destroy an entire generation. And yet, a part of him recognized that people are sometimes driven to the edge not because they wish to betray, but because they see no other choice. Would he move as a protector or as an executioner? The truth about the Forrester-Dupree relationship remained unspoken, yet signs lay scattered everywhere. Contracts altered, funds funneled through small companies, and Danny's name appearing in more places than she imagined. Perhaps she was only a figurehead, perhaps she knew everything and chose silence to preserve her footing. In their world, silence is sometimes the only option left between two cliffs: obliteration or consumption. The tale of Kat and Eva, seemingly a minor clash between two women, was in fact part of a wider network of power. Ted had waded in too deep, and Leslie knew it well. Every move Ted made now fell within her scope and perhaps Vernon's. While Ted believed he was doing the right thing to salvage his reputation, others around him saw him as a temporary piece, useful but replaceable. And if Leslie truly manipulated events as many suspected, then she was the one weaving the net that no one would escape. That night, as Anita sat unmoving in the study, the lamplight reflecting across her stern features, she knew something was changing beyond repair. Andre might not confess, but she could hear the tremor in his voice, and that was enough for her to understand that a true storm was approaching the Dupree family. She had once believed she could control everything with reason, but now reason no longer sufficed. Between truth and loyalty, which was worth preserving? The next morning, Danny returned from the shoot with flawless photographs in her hands and an indescribable emptiness in her chest. Everything around her felt too quiet to the point of terror. In the vast house, glances, polite greetings, and strange smiles formed a curtain hiding something on the verge of erupting. Would Andre find the courage to face what he had done, or choose silence and drift into darkness? Did Vernon truly want to protect the family's honor, or was he trying to erase an old mistake by forging a new one? And Leslie, the woman behind the smile, was she really the puppeteer, or merely another pawn on a board controlled by someone greater? As for Shanice, if she one day let go, would Derek vanish with her, or become the very thing she feared most? No one knew what would come next in that opulent mansion, where each person bore a shard of guilt and a sliver of deceit. Perhaps the most frightening thing was not truth laid bare, but truth twisted until no one could recognize themselves in it. And when light fell through the gates of Fairmont Crest, what they saw might not be deliverance, but the beginning of a new collapse where trust, love, and honor were all repurposed as weapons. As the morning wore on, Fairmont Crest put on an eerily quiet facade, as if the wind had carried off every sound left from the night before. Yet inside each room, hairline cracks were spreading. Andre sat alone in his study, a pale light casting tension across his face. The paper Vernon had sent lay neatly on the desk, a financial report, expertly altered, whose irregularities only a truly versed eye would catch. There were no accusations, only numbers, but they said everything. Andre knew this meant Vernon had traced the very past he had tried to bury. What filled him now was no longer fear, but a tug-of-war between the instinct to survive and the remnant of a conscience. He understood that if he stayed silent, he would be crushed. If he pushed back, everything could shatter, not only his career, but his family, and Danny's honor along with it. Anita entered, gentle yet resolute, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Her eyes were no longer as cold as the night before, disappointment mingled with pity there. Andre said nothing, only lifted his gaze, and in that instant he realized she knew it all. Not just the numbers, but the partners he had chosen, the covert dealings with an anonymous conglomerate that had manipulated the Dupree Charitable Fund to launder money for an international project. At the time, Andre believed he was doing the right thing, a temporary act of salvation to preserve Danny's reputation and keep their marriage from falling apart. But now everything he had hidden had turned into a blade pressed to his own throat. Anita didn't need many words. She simply stood there, looking at him like a mother watching her child ruin his own future. Meanwhile, Vernon chose silence. He understood the power of waiting. He had sent that report not to topple Andre at once, but to see how he would react. He had once told Anita that the most dangerous person is not the traitor, but the one who knows he is guilty and still labors to prove his innocence. And Vernon believed Andre was headed down that road. He wanted to see the man face himself before he intervened. That was how Vernon protected honor. Not by hiding errors, but by letting the offender reveal his own nature. Danny came home at midday, still holding the ad proofs, her smile not yet faded when she sensed the heaviness that smothered the house. She noticed something altered in Andre's eyes, something had just been stripped bare. She had suspected him before, only to convince herself he was merely tired. But today, that fatigue had a distinct shape: guilt. Danny didn't ask questions, and she didn't cry. She set the photographs quietly on the table and walked away. She knew that if she asked, he would lie, and she wasn't strong enough to endure another lie. Outside, Leslie was executing the final moves of her plan. She had obtained a copy of a contract tied to the investment fund Ted and Eva had once created, bearing Andre's indirect signature. If she handed the document to Vernon, Andre would lose everything. If she kept it, she could bargain. Leslie understood this game: whoever holds the secret controls the war. She knew Vernon was not easily swayed, but every great power has a weakness, and his was the fear that his legacy might be stained. All she had to do was use Andre as a pawn, forcing Vernon to choose between honor and blood. Ted, for his part, was beginning to realize he was surrounded. Every project he touched was under scrutiny, and Leslie no longer hid the fact that she possessed files that could ruin him. He felt betrayed, but he was also drawn to her. Leslie was too skilled at making betrayal feel like a form of salvation. She made him believe that if he stood with her, the two of them could start over. What Ted didn't know was that every word she spoke had been calculated to make him dependent. Shanice, by contrast, was laboring through sleepless nights. Derek was growing increasingly erratic. The medications he claimed to need for his health seemed to be pushing him out of control. She began to suspect he wasn't ill as he said he was, that his performance of fragility was a way to keep her close. She felt trapped between pity and contempt, between love and fear. One evening, when she found a hidden phone under his pillow with messages to an unnamed woman, her heart nearly broke. But what terrified her most wasn't the infidelity, it was his final text: "If she leaves, I won't survive." Shanice understood she had become Derek's fatal weakness, and that meant she could not leave without precipitating a disaster. All these strands converged one evening when Anita called a closed meeting at Fairmont Crest. No press, no outsiders, only familiar faces growing strange. Vernon sat at the head of the table, eyes cold as steel. Andre sat opposite, silent, hands clenched. Danny stood behind, fighting for composure. Ted and Leslie were invited under the pretext of an investment progress update. But everyone knew this was no longer a business meeting, it was an unofficial tribunal. Vernon spoke briefly. The family's charitable fund showed signs of exploitation, and everyone present was connected. He named no one, but his gaze locked on Andre. The air grew stifling. Anita studied each reaction, and what she saw made her heart heavy. Andre neither protested nor apologized. He only lowered his head, as if silence could save him. Vernon took that as an admission. Rising, his voice dropped, not angry, but thick with disappointment. "There are some mistakes," he said, "that money and apologies cannot repair, and the honor of the Dupree name cannot be bought." He announced the immediate suspension of Andre's involvement in all fund activities and returned control to Anita. The room fell into a hush. Danny turned away, tears falling unseen. Leslie sat still, a brief spark of triumph flaring in her eyes. She knew the moment to act had come. After the meeting, Andre slipped out quietly. Leslie was waiting. She handed him an envelope, the copy of the contract with the signature he had tried to bury. She didn't need to threaten him, the look in her eyes was enough to make him understand she could destroy him at will. She said she could help him escape, but in exchange, he would have to help her get to Vernon to finalize a larger deal. Andre stood at a fork in the road. If he agreed, he would betray the last scrap of his honor; if he refused, he would lose everything. Meanwhile, Danny returned to her room and looked at her own photographs, the smile, the light, the carefully crafted perfection. She realized that all along she, too, had been a piece on a board other people arranged. She didn't know who was moving the pieces, but a chill ran through her at the thought that everything, her career, her love, her life, might be nothing more than a tool in someone else's hand. In the darkness, Vernon stared out at the back garden. He had believed honor could save everything, and now he wasn't so sure. The more he tried to preserve it, the more he saw how fragile it was. If Andre fell, would this family truly be saved, or would it be one more time they severed their own lifeblood? And Leslie, was she deft enough to ride the wave she had summoned, or would her own ambition drown her? Elsewhere, Shanice quietly packed, her eyes emptied out. She knew that if she left, Derek might never let her go. If she stayed, she would lose herself entirely. She wrote a note, left on the table, a single spare line, "Don't look for me." Then she stepped out of the house, her figure melting into the night, while behind her Derek woke to a void, and in the haze of his dependence realized he had lost the one thing that still made him feel human. At Fairmont Crest, every door seemed to be closing, yet that silence was not an ending, it was the beginning of a new chain reaction. Someone would strike back. Someone would betray. And when the sun rose, only one question would hang in the gilded air: does honor mean anything when everyone has become a hostage to ambition?